Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Sitting in for Pinky Webb, I'm Mai Rodriguez. Today on the program, more than 21 million students have enrolled for the new school year. And the Education Department is urged to come up with a plan to revert the opening of classes to June next year. Education Assistant Secretary Francis Bringas joins us live. Serious actions sought against Vice President and Education Secretary Sara Duterte over the alleged illegal use of confidential funds in 2022. ACT Teachers Party List Representative Castro tells us more later in the program. All set for the opening of classes this week as classes in public schools begin Tuesday. At least 21 million learners have enrolled for the school year 2023 to 2024. Calabarzon had the highest number of enrolled students, followed by Metro Manila and Central Luzon. The Cordillera region has the least number of enrollees. Let's go straight to the source of the story, Education Assistant Secretary Francis Bringas. Good morning, Asst. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Good morning, Mai. Good morning to all our viewers.
Glad to have you with us, ma'am. First of all, public schools will be open tomorrow, August 29. Now, how would you describe the preparedness of the Education Department and schools in general?
Well, in general, I can say that all systems go for the opening on August 29. 100% of our schools participated or conducted the Brigada Escuela last week, and we had a full week of enrollment this week as well.
Okay, could you give us an update, Asek, on the number of students who have enrolled so far, and what's the target number of students this year?
Well, as of yesterday, we have already recorded in our Learner Information System, our LIS, that we have over 22 million who have enrolled, 19 million coming from the public schools, and the other 3 million coming from the private schools. We are expecting around 28 million learners all over the country for both public and private schools, including our state universities and colleges and local universities and colleges and our alternative learning system. So medyo mabagal lang yung ating turnout doon sa LIS, but given the fact that advisors and other teachers are supposed to encode their enrollment in our LIS system over the weekend, so we are expecting a higher number next week.
Asek, until when can schools accommodate students?
Well, the last day is supposed to be last Saturday, but as usual, there will be many late enrollees as part of the culture of the Filipinos already to come in late. And we usually have the influx of late enrollees during the first week of classes. So we are expecting a big number of increase in our enrollment during the first week.
Right, okay. Now, let's talk about the common challenges during school opening, like the lack of classrooms and congested classrooms. Now, how is the DepEd addressing these issues?
Well, the perennial problem on shortage of classrooms and highly congested schools will be solved in a long-term solution, which is blended or institutionalization of blended learning. We have learned from our 2 years of pandemic that there are many best practices that were conducted or that were done in several schools all over the country, and we intend to look at these best practices to incorporate them into our system of developing a standard and institutionalized blended learning. So we will be adapting measures on alternative delivery modes like modified in-school, off-school approach. We have the digital and distance learning modalities that includes digital and printed materials and other modalities that would not require teachers and learners to be in the schools every day. So in the institutionalization of the blended learning, we will be redefining our definition of classrooms, and we will be looking into a new definition for learning spaces.
You mentioned ASEC blended learning and some best practices to be adopted. Ano? Di ba nag-start na naman last year some of the best practices. How do you think, in your assessment, how have the students and the teachers adapted to these measures so far?
Well, since this is a first time for most of the students, it only started in 2021 during the pandemic, and there are apprehensions and hesitations on the part of the learners because it is a first time, and we had been experiencing birth pains for this type of modality. But given that we have been doing this for the past 3 years already, I hope that we have the right time now to really institutionalize the blended learning modality so that we can be true to the promise of the Matatag agenda, which is looking into the delivery of the curriculum in two ways. One is the traditional method, and the other one.
You got to be a bit choppy there, ASEC, again. But let's talk about... ASEC, are you still there? ASEC, it's a bit choppy right now, ano? So we will now address sana po yung classroom backlog ngayon. I want to ask Sana, do you have estimates on how much is needed to address the classroom backlog, ASEC? Okay, we have a bit of a connection problem with ASEC Francis Bringas. We're talking about the school opening tomorrow for public schools. And right now, we're going to try to have her back again. ASEC, can you hear me? Okay, we'll be fixing this connection problem. We'll be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. I'm Maya Rodriguez. Our source today, Education Assistant Secretary Francis Bringas. ASEC, earlier before we were cut off, you were mentioning to institutionalize blended learning. Can you clarify a bit, sino po ang, is this applicable to all schools, and in what circumstances po magkakaroon ng blended learning?
Okay, this is going to be institutionalized nationwide, as we have been adopting during the past natural disasters like typhoons. We have been doing blended learning in many of our schools that are affected by these disasters, and we intend to do the same for highly congested schools and schools which are affected by natural calamities and natural disasters as well.
Okay. ASEC, let's talk about the classroom backlog. Ano po yung classroom backlog right now? And do you have estimates on how much is needed to address this problem?
Well, in the Senate hearing that we had last week in the committee of Senator Bringas, we have already reported that we have around 159 accumulated gaps in our classrooms. So that's the total shortage as of now. That is why, since we are not able to, we won't be able to solve this gap or to close this gap in the next 3 years. We are looking at the long-term solution, which is the blended learning or institutionalization of the blended learning, so that we won't be requiring too many classrooms once we have this institutionalized.
Okay, so this is one way to address the classroom shortage, ano, yung institutionalizing blended learning. Kasi po dun sa 2024 budget, you only have 10 billion pesos for the classroom shortage.
Yes, that is right. That is the annual budget that is given to the department, and obviously it's not enough to close the gap in the next 2 years. That is why we saw it fit for the department to really have this long-term plan, because we want our delivery of the curriculum to be continuous.
Can you give us the number again, ASEC, doon sa classroom backlog? You mentioned total of
59,000
total of classroom backlog.
Yes.
So among the solutions...
Let me just clarify that is an accumulated shortage over the years already.
Okay, ma'am.
And that includes, of course, the recent damages caused by the natural disasters this year.
Well, among the solutions implemented in the past is the shifting of schedules. Is this also still being done?
Yes, in the highly congested areas or where we have very high enrollment, we still adopt shifting of classes. Normally or ideally, we have 2 shifts, but for the really congested areas or schools, we have as many as 3 shifts. But our regional directors have been looking into possibilities of really reducing this into just a minimum of 2 shifts so that we can have more time for learners to be in the school for the face-to-face classes.
Asik, how about renting private schools as added facilities?
Yeah, we have been exploring that possibility. However, we still don't have a line item in our budget that would allow us to lease the existing private school facilities, particularly the private schools that closed during the pandemic. But that is in our part of our exploration as our partnership with the private schools as well.
Well, Senator Win Gatchalian is proposing expanding the voucher program so that more students can enroll in private schools. Is this possible, Asik?
Well, if you look at the Matatag agenda that was launched by the Vice President sometime in January, you will see that part of the agenda is expanding the coverage or the scope of our voucher program or our education service contracting scheme. In the Congress, we have a pending expansion of the gospel law that would include our K-6 learners as recipients of the program. And we are participating in the deliberations and we have been submitting our position papers positively supporting the e-gospel law. So we hope that this will come into fruition in the next year once the bill is passed into law.
Okay, let's now talk about the Makati-Taguig row. In terms of the school opening in the 14 public schools in the Embo barangays, will this push through, ma'am? And the DepEd is now handling these schools amid the issue. So what's the status of the transition committee handling this?
Well, the transition committee has already started or had already their initial meeting last week, and they are in full control of the situation in both, in the 14 Embo schools. As a matter of fact, I am personally tasked by the Vice President to be visiting these 14 schools tomorrow during the opening of classes because we want to make sure that even if there is an ongoing rift between these 2 cities regarding this jurisdiction over the schools, we still find it proper that the central office will assume responsibility and authority over these 14 schools until such time the transition committee has completed their transition plan.
Asik, na-settle na po ba yung issue sa kung sino ang magbabayad ng kuryente, ng tubig and health services at manpower sa mga school na ito?
Well, with regards to manpower and other utility bills of the schools, that's still up to the committee, the transition team, to determine because they are part of their function is really to look into the inventory of these schools, the equipment and the materials that are inside, and an inventory of the personnel that are being paid or locally paid by Makati, and looking also into the plantilla of the personnel of these 14 schools so that when the clarification of the ruling comes finally, then we will be able to transition and we'll be able to place these 14 schools in their proper schools division offices.
Okay, Asik, there are numerous proposals from lawmakers to revert to the old school calendar, which is in June. So is the DepEd inclined to do this?
Well, we have ongoing studies under one of our bureaus on the shift going back to June, if ever we're going back to June. But what we can assure the public is by June 2024, we cannot yet go into a June opening because the 2023-2024 is going to end in June 14. So obviously, hindi tayo pwede mag-open ng June for 2024-2025. But we have a study already in our bureau that looks at least 3 to 4 years before we can gradually transition to a June opening.
Okay, one last question, Asek, before we let you go. The DepEd is requesting 150 million pesos in confidential funds for 2024. Enlighten us po, why is the DepEd pushing for the confidential funds?
Well, much like the justification of the department last year, that the Department of Education, particularly our learners and our teachers, are being recruited for on the other side, if I may say, and it is a matter of national security that our learners and teachers as well are involved in these activities. That is why the department has requested for the inclusion of confidential funds for the department. But again, it is merely a proposal, and it is up to Congress to evaluate and deliberate on the proposal of the department, and we will see if it is going to be approved by Congress.
All right, thank you for joining us this morning, Education Assistant Secretary Francis Bringas. We'll be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. I'm Mai Rodriguez. Our source today, ACT Teachers Party List Representative Franz Castro. Good morning, Representative Castro.
Good morning, Mai, and to your viewers.
Glad to have you with us today, Congresswoman. Now, I was just speaking to DepEd Assistant Secretary Bringas, and she told us all systems go for tomorrow's school opening. Your overall assessment, Congresswoman, on the readiness for the school opening?
Well, as I can see, no, for the teachers, tingin ko naman they are always ready kahit na kulang nga yung kanilang bakasyon. And tomorrow, I will visit some schools to find out the facilities, find out the situation of teachers and students. So I think ready naman yung ating mga teachers.
What are your concerns so far ahead of the school opening tomorrow, Congresswoman?
Well, my concern is that the class size, the number of class size per students, per class, and then the situation of our teachers, their scheduling, and of course the facilities.
We also talked about earlier yung with DepEd ASEC Bringas, we talked about the classroom backlog, and you said it's 159,000 total classroom backlog, but this is accumulated over the years, and this is an annual problem. Why do you think, Congresswoman, is this difficult to address?
Well, if there are plan to address this classroom shortage, no. Kasi ngayon, even in the budget for 2024, ang sinadjust lang nila ay 7,000 classrooms. So talagang malayo pa dun sa 159. So kung makakapag-suggest sila, no, or kung makakapag-propose sila na more than that, siguro madali nating ma-address yung 159 na backlog.
Napakalayo nga, 7,000 tapos 159 yung 159,000 yung backlog. Do you think Congress should allocate a bigger budget for classroom construction?
Well, ang laki nga ng binabudget, doon sa DPWH, yung mga infrastructure project. So kung magpa-prioritize ang ating Congress, ang executive, ay talagang ma-address naman ito. So if they're only prioritizing the classroom instead of other infrastructure projects.
Congresswoman, you're also calling for a probe on the Office of the Vice President's use of confidential funds in 2022. Tell us, why do you think the use of 125 million pesos in confidential funds last year was illegal?
In 2022, Mai, as we dig into the budget of the Office of the Vice President, we have found out na they have this 125 confidential expenses. So, nung tinignan natin ito sa budget ng 2022, wala namang there is no authorization for this confidential fund. So yun ang tinitignan natin doon kasi hindi ito authorized, at nakita natin there was a contingent fund from the office of the President na nanggaling itong 125 confidential fund. So we think this is illegal kasi wala itong authorization from the Congress, and if ever meron ang presidente, hindi rin naman natin nakita yung from the contingent fund ay hindi rin naman tama na gamitin sa confidential fund itong contingent fund. Kasi defined kasi doon sa ano ba yung ibig sabihin nung contingent fund, sinasabi doon kapag may mga emergencies na meron at tayo during that time, doon lang pwedeng magkaroon ng contingency fund. Pero this is confidential fund at malinaw ginamit ito confidential fund in 19 days during that year.
So what exactly do you want to find out in this probe, and do you think you have the support of your fellow lawmakers on this possible investigation?
Since we have already established that this 125 million was not intended for confidential fund, so ang hinihiling sana natin ipaliwanag ng Office of the Vice President or the Vice President personally during the budget briefing saan nila ginastos ito. Kasi kung itinatago lang nila yung mga gastusin on the confidential fund, that is illegal kasi hindi naman ito confidential fund.
If proven there is some anomaly in this, how serious do you think is this offense, and is it impeachable?
Well, pinag-aaralan pa natin yan, May. There are other laws that could be used for the act if it is proven illegal, unconstitutional. But the idea of impeachment is still premature, Meg.
Okay, Congresswoman, let's talk about the K-12 program, which was launched 11 years ago. What is your assessment of this?
Well, that was implemented in 2013. So I think we have to overhaul the whole system, the K-12 program. And we can see na wala pa naman talagang official assessment and evaluation of the K-12 program. So dapat bilagyan talaga ng budget yung K-12 program at ayusin yung ating curriculum.
Finally, Congresswoman, what are your proposals to improve the program or the whole education sector?
Well, tama naman yung i-decongest yung ating mga subject, i-decongest yung ating mga topics. And then number 2, ibalik yung yung history as Philippine history as a dedicated subject. Tapos talagang pagtuunan din ng ng pansin at pagtuunan din ng pondo yung tinatawag na mother tongue. Maibalik sana yung mother tongue dahil mahalaga na mapag-aralan din ng mga bata yung regional language. Kasi alam natin that languages are evolving. So yun yung sinasabi natin, bawasan ang class size. Yun, bawasan ang class size, tapos i-improve din natin yung yung training ng mga teachers, dagdagan din ng teachers.
All right, thank you for your insights. Maraming salamat po for joining us this morning, ACT Teachers Party List Representative Franz Castro. And thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm May Rodriguez, sitting in for Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.